Hello and welcome back to another edition of the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. Andy Barch joined alongside a guy who's just a couple of shades darker now after his vacation last week, Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and, of course, BrownsZone.com. Scott, we're here to talk Browns, but before we dive into that, how was Jamaica?
Yeah, it was awesome. I think I'd stopped there on a cruise once years ago. This was the first time I spent any kind of real time there, and it was great. It was perfect. 85 degrees, sunny, nice breeze. I mean, it was absolutely perfect. It felt like paradise. So from a personal perspective, it was great. I will have to say that every time I checked my phone, sometimes I'd leave it in my room or it's in my pocket, whatever. Felt like every time I checked it, the Browns were doing something, which is kind of aggravating because I thought I picked a good week to get away. It's supposed to be downtime, a little break before the combine. We get the Myles Garrett reinstatement. We get the Myles Garrett interview. We get, some assistant coaches were announced. We knew those were coming. But it just felt like there's something to catch up on or ignore or feel bad that I was ignoring. And then just plenty to, how it is. You come back, and this week there's been plenty of news. They made cuts, Jarvis Landry surgery. So there really is no off-season.
No, and I think that's the way that Commissioner Roger Goodell likes it, the fact that there really is no lull in the NFL news cycle, and you're exactly right. I don't know that if you take a look at the calendar that you could have picked a better week to go away for vacation, but it seems like there's always something to talk about, not only in the NFL, but specifically with the Browns. And, we can start with this Myles Garrett thing just because we kind of thought that this had gone away. Then, of course, the announcement was made that I think was to some degree expected, Scott. I mean, I think we all kind of figured that Myles Garrett had done and said all of the right things after the indefinite suspension. But after that suspension is lifted, then all of a sudden we start to hear more about what may or may not have been said during the incident back in November. And Scott, I don't really know that this is ever totally going to go away because if there's proof of it, the NFL isn't going to release it. They say they don't have it, and there are a lot of people that don't necessarily believe that. But until we hear otherwise, it's just a he said type situation.
No, you're 100% right, Andy. And it's interesting because we did know that Myles was going to be reinstated. Right? That was the opinion. I think somebody told me, I don't know if it was 2 weeks after the original suspension. It might even been quicker than that. Hey, we don't expect this to linger into 2020. And knowing Myles and knowing how apologetic he was and still is about, hitting Mason Rudolph over the head with his helmet, you could see that he was going to be reinstated. So it would maybe happen a little quicker than we expected. There's no real rush because the off-season program doesn't start until April 6th. But they got it away. They got it out of the way, and that's good. But then, Myles does his first interview with ESPN and says the same stuff he's been saying. Now, when I say he's been saying, to the appeals officer, to people in the Browns organization, he tweeted about it after the first allegation became public, when it got leaked from the appeal that he accused Mason Rudolph of the racial slur. Myles said, "I know what I heard." I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he tweeted. So he just doubled down on that, and of course, it brought up all the same emotions, and it brought up all the same arguments, and it got the Steelers hacked off, I believe was Mike Tomlin's term. And he went on ESPN, and the Steelers put out a statement, and Mason Rudolph put out a statement, and Mason Rudolph's agent and lawyer put out a statement and talked about possibility of a defamation lawsuit. So it kind of rekindled everything that we'd been talking about in mid-November when it happened. And my biggest takeaway is that I still believe Myles Garrett, right? I'm seeing him on camera talking about it. I've dealt with Myles now for a few years. I don't always agree with Myles, and there's plenty of public stances that he's had that kind of rub me the wrong way a little bit if he'll criticize a coach or whatever. But I believe him, and I believe that he's basically a good guy, and coming from a good spot. So I don't really doubt him. I will say this, and I was having this discussion with some of my colleagues the other day. how strong Mike Tomlin was in defense of Mason Rudolph did give me a little bit of pause, and I thought, would he go out on this? I don't know if it's big of a limb, but would he be this strong if he had doubts about Mason Rudolph? And I don't know that answer. So let's say I believe Myles Garrett, and I'm just picking a number here. If 80% I believe Myles Garrett, maybe it goes down to 78% when Mike Tomlin is that strong. But I still believe Myles. And you're right, it's not going away. And it's certainly not going away if there is a lawsuit. I don't expect there to be a lawsuit. I think that just brings up too many issues and too many possible problems for Rudolph's side. What if there is evidence out there and he looks terrible? And it's really hard to prove a negative. You know what I mean? Like Myles Garrett might be able to prove that Mason Rudolph said what he said. If there's audio or if somebody else comes forward. It'll be tough for Mason Rudolph ever to prove that he didn't say it. So I think there's a can of worms that could be open there. And one last point on this, Mike Tomlin said, hey, there is evidence. The evidence is that there is no evidence, right? The NFL did an investigation and was not able to corroborate this at all. But the fact is, when Myles Garrett says that Mason Rudolph called him a stupid N-word, it was when Garrett was taking Rudolph to the ground. And I just rewatched the film the other day, and there's no Browns player within 5 or 6 yards. So nobody on the Browns is going to say, yes, I heard him say that, because they're not around. There are a couple Steelers relatively close who may have heard it, and maybe that would be the big explosive thing if one of those Steelers said, yeah, I did hear it, whether it's soon or eventually say it. But Mike Tomlin keeps saying, well, nobody from the Browns told me anything about it. Well, in the immediate aftermath, nobody else had heard it. And Myles went into the locker room and told Larry Ogunjobi immediately, because they both had been ejected, told John Dorsey either that night or the next day. People I talked to with the Browns knew within hours or days. So the timeline of, well, why didn't he come forth with it sooner? I don't find that valid at all, because I believe he told the people he needed to tell in a timely fashion.
And we will certainly discuss this in the coming weeks because, as you mentioned there, Scott, I don't think that this is going away anytime soon, especially if a lawsuit does indeed come out of this. So this story is far from being over and done with. But we'll take a look at some other topics here as well. And I was laughing as I was reading your article a couple days ago when you were talking about how you kind of felt like you left at the right time. And then no matter how hard you tried to put your phone down, it seemed like there were a couple of new tweets that came up that you had to pay attention to. And, one of the more interesting things that happened when you were away was the Browns decided to bring in former Colts general manager Ryan Grigson in an advisory role. Now, there are a couple different ways of looking at this. Grigson was the GM of the Colts, as you detailed in your article, from 2012 to 2016. The Colts did indeed make the playoffs in his first 3 seasons before going 8-8 in the last couple of years. And I think there are people who look at this in a couple of different ways. Some people really like it because it's another football guy to throw into the mix that's had some success. And then you have some people who are on the other side of the equation who, as you detailed in your article, aren't necessarily on board with the idea about bringing in a guy who, while he certainly did get it right with Andrew Luck, didn't do a whole lot to help him on the offensive line.
Yeah, there are definitely some concerns about Grigson. And when I start talking about him in a GM role, right, I don't think he's getting another GM job anytime soon. Now, maybe that changes if the Browns have a great run. He turns out to be Andrew Berry's right-hand man. But I think his tenure with the Colts had enough mixed results that nobody's in a hurry to hire Grigson. And I think that's, or at least as a GM, and I think that's kind of evident in the roles he's had, right? I think he spent the last couple of years, I think it was with Seattle, kind of in a consultant role. And he's had a little bit of time with the Browns because Andrew Berry brought him in, but that didn't last long because then John Dorsey replaced Sashi Brown and got rid of Grigson. So, you look at the Colts' success in going to the playoffs, and it'd be unfair to not give him any credit, but he did fall into Andrew Luck, right? Most GMs are 98% of GMs would have taken Andrew Luck, maybe 100%. Would have taken Andrew Luck with that first pick in the draft, and all of a sudden you have a franchise quarterback. The Colts had success under Peyton Manning, so it wasn't like they were a franchise that needed to be rebuilt. They had a lot of those same players, and just the Peyton Manning injury, and then wound up with Andrew Luck. So I think it's easy to kind of pick away at those playoff appearances. You point to the fact that, yes, he didn't do a good job constructing that offensive line, and it led to Andrew Luck injuries, and maybe led to an early, premature Andrew Luck retirement. And then the one that jumps out if you're a Browns fan or a Browns media person is the trade for Trent Richardson. Grigson, and now he was in a different spot than the Browns were because he had a playoff team. He thought he was trying to take a team take it the next step and get to the Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl. If you have that philosophy, you're willing to give up a low first-round pick for a running back. At least that's what Grigson decided to do. Looking back on it, Trent Richardson turns into a bust, right? His best year was his rookie year with the Browns. Joe Banner did a great job knowing when to sell Trent Richardson and do it. And I don't know if you'd ever trade a first-round pick for a running back just because they're so devalued. So that kind of stands out as well. It's a bad move. But I'll say this. The positive is he's been a GM before, and for a long time, right? 5-6 years. Andrew Berry's never been a GM. That experience will help Andrew Berry. They are connected from their time together with the Colts. That trust factor is important for Andrew Berry. And I think we talked about this bull the last time we did one of these. There's a vacuum at the top of the personnel department because Willie Wolf, Alonzo Highsmith, and Steve Malin all left right after Andrew Berry got hired. So I asked Berry at his press conference, are you going to hire somebody? And he said, no, we have enough talented personnel. And I was quickly told, well, he might bring in a consultant or two. He needs help, and this is the help he will have, and it's a trusted help to get him through free agency, to get him through the draft. And then Grigson's not going anywhere. I believe he will stay, and they'll just find a more defined role for him as opposed to right now he's an advisor or a consultant.
Well, Scott, some news that was made here the last couple of days. Jarvis Landry decided to change his mind, and he ends up having hip surgery, but that shouldn't keep him out of training camp. Any idea why he decided to change his mind and have this hip surgery?
Well, I think it starts with the fact that he didn't want to have the hip surgery. He made that clear when we talked to him December 30th, the day after the season finale. And that was the first time, not the first time he mentioned that surgery was a possibility, but he talked about, hey, I'm going to go meet with specialists. So I think he had the MRIs, and they were getting sent to a specialist. And that's the first time he said it would be 6 or 8 months recovery, and that was one of the reasons he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to spend his whole offseason in rehab and not being able to practice and not being able to really enjoy the offseason as part of it. So, plus surgery, I think people from the outside look at professional athletes have surgery like, oh, it's no big deal, they have surgery, and then they're back. Well, a lot goes into it, right? You can get infections. You might not come back the same, right? Maybe they find something in there and they're not able to fix it. Like, there's a bunch of concerns players have about having surgery, and I see it time and again, and I think those are, I don't know if they're well-founded, but they're understandable, just from a human level. So I think all those things went into it, and Jarvis was trying to do his best not to have surgery. Now, whether he knew before he went to the Pro Bowl, he's just like, it's bad, but I'm going to play in the Pro Bowl, I'm going to go to the Super Bowl, then I'm going to have it. He says that he wasn't going to have it, right? I can't remember if the Browns put it out there or his agent, but at some point in the offseason, it was he's not going to have surgery. And then he played in the Pro Bowl, so it didn't feel right, and that was kind of the last straw for him to go, and he kind of came to the decision that he needed to have it. Now, the Browns are putting the timetable at, he'll be back to football activities at some point in training. And if you go 6 months out from February 4th when he had the surgery, that puts you about the second week of training camp. It should take us another month, 5 weeks to get ready for the season, and the Browns expect him to be ready. Now, I'll say, waiting that extra month, right? He could have had surgery January 4th instead of February 4th. That kind of condenses that time frame. And if you have a little bit of setback, all of a sudden is week 1, week 2, week 3 in jeopardy. And, if it's just Jarvis trying to, have fun at the Pro Bowl and have fun at the Super Bowl, then I question the decision to delay. If, in fact, he wasn't sure and then the Pro Bowl finally convinced him, then it's more understandable to me. And it's his body and it's his offseason. But and I'll say this, Jarvis doesn't miss games. He's never missed an NFL game in 6 seasons. So he's not trying to do something to jeopardize his availability for week 1. I just think he was really torn about whether or not to have surgery, and he realized this was really the only option, and so he went ahead and had it.
It'll be fascinating to follow this timeline to see if indeed he misses a substantial amount of time in training camp. But, it's odd to sit here and say this. It seems like that's a far way off, but we're about 5 months away from getting that started again. But that'll certainly be interesting to follow. Another interesting thing to follow here, too, is with a new head coach and a new coaching staff, you kind of wonder how the personnel is going to take to that. You wrote an article a couple of days ago talking about new Browns offensive coordinator Alex Van Pelt, who is looking to change some things with Baker Mayfield's footwork. So how do you think he plans about going about doing that, and what kind of an influence do you think Alex Van Pelt can have on Baker Mayfield?
Well, he's going to start with he said he'll tweak Baker Mayfield's footwork under center and in the shotgun. And he was specific about in the shotgun, saying that right now in Baker's stance, he goes, there's 3 ways you can start as a quarterback. You can start with your feet. Cool. You start with your left foot in front and your right foot behind, or your right foot forward and your left foot behind. And he said Baker's been doing it with his right foot forward, and Van Pelt doesn't like that. So they're going to switch. He's going to put his left foot forward. To me, that makes sense because you throw that way, right? You throw with your left foot and your right foot, so why not start that way? And I'm sure Baker had a reason why he was doing that. He was coached that way, or he feels more comfortable that way. But Van Pelt is adamant that this is the way to do it. So it'll be worth monitoring. I don't think it's any kind of change that's going to derail Baker. I think Baker's a good enough athlete. I think he's a good enough feet that he'll be able to figure this out. But it is an adjustment. Van Pelt told him, hey, stand up in your living room and start working on this stance. And I have golf on in the background. It reminds me of, if you're not playing golf, but you're working on a swing change or a grip change, you can do that without going to hit a million balls. You hold the club and you work on your takeaway or whatever. And I can envision Baker doing that. And from a bigger picture, I do think Van Pelt's going to be good for Baker. Number one, he's been a quarterback in this league for 9 years. Now, mostly he's a backup, but still valuable experience. He's coached quarterbacks for a long time, multiple teams, most recently in Cincinnati. Before that, the Packers with arguably the best quarterback in the league. Point, right? 2-time MVP, Aaron Rodgers. To me, that's really good currency to go to a guy like that. Coach these guys. Listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. That dynamic in the quarterback room needed to change. Baker and Freddie had a French, we're close, right? That's one of the reasons Freddie Kitchens got the job. It was his good relationship with Baker. And Ron was buddies with Baker. And there was a lot of it might have felt too comfortable for Baker, and I think that changes with Alex Van Pelt and Kevin Stefanski. I think they will coach Baker harder, and I think Baker will accept that and kind of welcome it because that's the kind of competitor Baker is. And I think that's what Baker needs. He needs to be coached harder, especially coming off the last 2 years when maybe he wasn't, especially last year, maybe he wasn't coached as hard as he needed to be, and you saw lapses in footwork, right? Baker wasn't the same player in 2019 that he was in 2018 as a rookie, and part of that's Baker, but I will say part of it was coaching. So I think Alex Van Pelt's going to be good for Baker. They're not hiring a quarterback coach, so Van Pelt will be that guy in the room leading Baker, and I like that hands-on approach. And the final thought on that is we talked about Jarvis Landry and how he's going to, he's not going to he's not going to participate in the offseason program. Maybe he'll be here. He'll probably be here because he'll be rehabbing, but he's not going to be able to run routes. And you just wonder, we talked so much last year about chemistry and a lack of timing with Odell and Jarvis because they were limited in practice. Now, Jarvis still had a really good year, and I think he does have some chemistry built up with Baker because they played the last 2 years together. But it's not ideal with the new system for your quarterback to be missing his number 2 receiver until training camp. We think Odell Beckham Jr. will be better. He'll be ready to go coming with the hernia surgery. So that health won't be an issue. For Jarvis, it's not ideal that he's going to miss those reps April, May, June, and early July.
Well, before we close out today's edition here, Scott, certainly want to get your thoughts on what's coming up here in the next week or so as you'll be headed out to the NFL Combine. Always an interesting time of the year, and because of where the Browns are drafting this year, there will be at least a little bit more intrigue. So what are you expecting at the Combine when you head on down there next week?
Yeah, I take off Monday. Stuff gets underway Tuesday. Well, first of all, we're going to have an opportunity to talk to Andrew Berry, the GM, Kevin Stefanski, the coach. It's always a good sign to talk to those guys because now they're settled in a little bit. There's a lot of NFL business to take care of. You know, they started with some cuts this week. TJ Carey, the nickelback, was at the top of that list. He was going to make $6.75 million. Too much to pay him for a nickelback is what they determined. So that started the cuts. But there's other decisions that Andrew Berry needs to make. Right? He needs to decide, does he cut Chris Hubbard, the right tackle? Does he cut or restructure the contracts of Olivier Vernon and Christian Kirksey, both who dealt with injuries last year? Kirksey's dealt with injuries for a couple of years. Both lived up to their contracts. Both had big money due to them in 2020, and the Browns have an out in the contracts. And then you have to look at your free agents. Are they going to try to re-sign Joe Schobert? Can they get him re-signed before he hits the open market? If not, does another team blow Joe Schobert away with an offer and the Browns choose not to match? And then what free agents do they target? So there's a ton of things to talk about from a Browns perspective. Then we shift to the Combine's, I guess, main purpose, which is preparing for the draft. You're right. The Browns have the number 10 pick in the draft. We all know that they need 2 tackles. Do they get one of those in free agency and then draft one at number 10? That seems to be the most logical plan from my perspective. You decide which one do you sign in free agency, which one do you draft, right tackle or left tackle. And that could depend on who you love at number 10, who you love in free agency. So those are moving pieces, but I'm looking forward to standing in front of these tackles, talking to them, looking at the mix, because it feels like there's 3, 4, 5 guys that could be in the mix at number 10. Then the Browns are going to need at least one safety. They're probably going to need 1 or 2 tight ends because Kevin Stefanski relies on tight ends, and to me that's a position of weakness. Andrew Berry cut Demetrius Harris, who was the number 2 tight end, or actually he was the number 1 tight end last year because David Njoku was hurt for so much of the season. So I think there'll be an overhaul at tight end. I think there'll be an overhaul at safety, and then that tackle position. And if you cut Olivier Vernon, then you need to go get a pass rusher. So there's a lot to pay attention to at the Combine. I always love that week. It's great to be around these draft guys. You get to see all these former coaches. You run into them around Indy. There's a million stories. And I know we just talked about it. There's not really an off-season, but this really kicks in the gear in the free agency and the draft, and it feels like kind of the start of 2020.
Yeah, well, it should be very exciting stuff. Looking forward to your coverage all next week. And I'm out of town in Arizona next week, so you and I will get an opportunity to catch up that following week and recap what you saw at the Combine. And who knows what kinds of other Browns news is going to come down the pike here in the meantime, because even in a week where you thought you were in the clear when you were down in Jamaica, the Browns still found a way to make some news. So I'm sure something will pop up between now and then. But, Scott, as always, a pleasure to sit down and do the podcast with you and have some fun out there in Indy. Should be a good time at the Combine, and we'll do this again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bull.
Thank you, Scott. Again, that's Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and, of course, BrownsZone.com. That's going to wrap things up for today's edition of the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you again for tuning in. We'll catch you all again next week.